I knew the room was cheap for a reason, but I expected bad plumbing, thin walls, maybe a neighbor who practiced drums at midnight. I did not expect Adrian Mercer to hand me a printed page of house rules before I had carried my second box upstairs. Kitchens shared. Laundries in the basement. Quiet after 11, he said, standing beside the front door while I skimmed the list. Then he tapped the final line with one finger. No guests upstairs. No exceptions. I looked up. Adrian was 34, according to the lease, though the severe expression made him seem older until he smiled, which, so far, he had done exactly once. Not even for an hour? Not even for 5 minutes. I needed the room more than I needed visitors. After losing my old job and taking a lower-paying position across town, affordable rent mattered more than dignity. My savings had already taken enough hits between deposits, moving costs, and the weeks I had spent pretending unemployment was temporary. Fine, I said. I'm not exactly running a nightclub. Something shifted near the corner of his mouth. Good. He carried one of my heavier boxes upstairs without asking, set it just inside the room, and immediately stepped back into the hall. Efficient, polite, almost aggressively respectful of the boundary he had just explained. An hour later, I was sitting on the floor of my new bedroom surrounded by half-open boxes when someone knocked. Adrian stood in the doorway. The window sticks, he said. I forgot to tell you. He crossed the room, released the old latch with a practiced lift, then showed me how to close it without forcing the frame. That's it. That's it. But he did not leave. Instead, he glanced at the stack of books beside my mattress. You carried all those yourself? Most of them. My back has already filed a complaint. That earned me his second smile. I remembered something he had mentioned downstairs. You said there's a hardware store nearby? 2 blocks east. Don't use the one on Grant. They overcharge. I'll remember that. He nodded, yet remained by the window. For a man who had just established strict boundaries about who could enter my room, Adrian seemed surprisingly comfortable standing inside it. Finally, he looked toward the hall. You start work Monday, right? I had told him that once during the rental interview. Yeah. 9. Traffic gets bad around 8:15. Leave early. Landlord advice? His eyes returned to mine. Something like that. Then he stepped into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed behind him. I stared at it for a moment. No guests. No exceptions. Apparently, the rule did not include Adrian. By the end of my first week, I had learned 2 things about living with Adrian. He kept the house almost unervingly organized, and he had an impressive number of reasons to knock on my door. On Tuesday evening, it was the heating. The vent in here gets temperamental, he said, crouching beside it while I sat at my desk. It feels fine. I adjusted it downstairs. He checked the airflow anyway, stood, and looked around as though searching for a second malfunction. How was the commute? I turned in my chair. Better because somebody warned me about traffic. Then my work here is done. He stayed another 4 minutes. Thursday, it was the window latch again. I opened the door and found him staring at the perfectly functional window behind me. Did it stick? No, good. I waited. Adrian waited. So this was a wellness check for the window? His mouth twitched. Preventive maintenance. Very dedicated landlord. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe and asked how the new job was going. I told him it was fine, which was the answer I gave everyone. The truth was that taking a lower-paying position after losing the job I had thought would become my career still felt like moving backward. But backward with a paycheck was better than standing still. For now, my plan was simple. Spend as little as possible, rebuild my savings, and eventually rent a place where the kitchen cabinets and the rules belonged to me. Adrian knew only the practical version. You're getting home later than I expected, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You're tracking my schedule? No. You just know when I'm supposed to be home. I live here, Evan. There was something almost defensive in the way he said it. I smiled. Landlord responsibility? Exactly. By Saturday, I was beginning to recognize the pattern. That evening, Adrian knocked to remind me that the washing machine sometimes needed an extra push on the door before it would start. I already used it this morning. I know. The words came out before he seemed to consider them. I folded my arms. He glanced toward the stairs. You were doing laundry when I made coffee, right? Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable exactly. More like neither of us wanted to be the first to admit there was no reason for him to still be standing there. You know, I said, for a man with a strict policy about people coming upstairs, you spend a surprising amount of time at my door. His expression tightened just slightly. I own the house. Convenient exception. I'm not a guest. Technically, he had me there, but he still did not leave. Instead, his gaze dropped to the book open on my desk. You finished the other one already? I looked at him. 3 nights earlier, he had noticed what I was reading while supposedly checking my window. I had forgotten the conversation almost immediately. He hadn't. Last night. Was it good? Are you asking as my landlord? That finally made him laugh, quiet and brief, and the sound changed his whole face. No, the answer landed differently than it should have. Adrian seemed to realize it too. His smile disappeared, but he did not retreat. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other across the doorway. Then he nodded toward the book. Tell me if this one's better. He walked downstairs before I could answer. I closed the door and leaned against it, annoyed by how much I was smiling. The cheap room was supposed to be temporary. Adrian was supposed to be the man whose name appeared above mine on a lease. Instead, sometime during that first week, I had started listening for his knock. After that, Adrian stopped pretending every conversation needed to begin with something broken. Not completely. He still seemed more comfortable approaching me with a practical excuse attached. But our shared routines had started doing the work for him. If I came downstairs after work and found him in the kitchen, I stayed there instead of taking dinner upstairs. If he was already sitting at the table when I walked in, the empty chair across from him somehow became mine without either of us discussing it. One Wednesday evening, I finished eating and realized I had been sitting there for nearly 40 minutes. My plate had been empty for 20. Adrian noticed me looking at it. You can leave, you know? So can you. I live here. So do I. Temporarily. Something changed in his expression at that last word, too quickly for me to identify. Then he picked up his glass. How's the saving going? Slowly, but going. Yeah, that mattered to me. Every paycheck put a little more distance between the version of myself who had lost his job and the one I was trying to become. The room was affordable enough that I could finally watch my savings increase instead of disappear. I should have been thinking about the apartment I would eventually rent. Instead, I was noticing that Adrian had rolled his sleeves to his elbows. That was becoming a problem. The attraction itself wasn't difficult to admit privately. Adrian was handsome, especially when he forgot to look guarded. The dangerous part was everything else. The remembered details, the conversations that stretched past their natural endings, the way I had begun measuring evenings by whether he appeared. None of that proved he wanted me. A lonely homeowner could enjoy talking to his tenant without wanting to kiss him. A tenant could mistake attention for attraction because he wanted it to be attraction. So I decided not to test it. Adrian made that decision difficult. 2 nights later, I was reading at my desk when he appeared at my open doorway without knocking on the frame. He stopped there. No maintenance emergency? I asked. No broken window? No laundry consultation? His eyes narrowed. I'm starting to regret telling you anything about this house. I smiled. Then why are you upstairs? For a second, he had no answer. He could have gone downstairs. Instead, he leaned against the doorway. How was work? I laughed softly. That's your excuse? I asked a question. And you climbed an entire staircase to ask it. Adrian looked away, but not before I saw the reaction. That was new. Usually, teasing made him retreat behind dry practicality. This time, I had actually made him uncomfortable. I should have stopped. Instead, I glanced deliberately around my room. You realize something, right? What? You've probably spent more time near the room where guests are forbidden than any actual guest ever would. The change in him was immediate. His shoulders stiffened. That rule exists for a reason. The humor left my voice. Okay. He looked toward the stairs. For the first time, I wondered whether I had touched something that had nothing to do with me. I waited for an explanation. None came. Adrian straightened. Good night, Evan. Good night. He walked away. I stared after him, feeling guilty and curious in equal measure. Whatever had created that rule, it was real enough to shut him down. That should have made the rest easier to classify. Boundaries, privacy, a landlord protecting his home. Except the next evening, when I came downstairs and found Adrian in the kitchen, he looked up immediately. There was an empty chair across from him. I could have kept walking. He could have returned his attention to what he was doing. Neither of us did. I sat down, and when Adrian quietly pushed the other mug toward me, I understood something I could no longer explain away as household convenience. Whatever the rule meant, whatever history sat behind it, Adrian was no longer merely tolerating my presence in his house. He was choosing it. 3 nights later, the radiator in my room started making a metallic knocking sound that even I couldn't pretend was normal. I found Adrian downstairs. Before you ask, this one is real. He looked up. What is? Your chance to perform actual landlord duties. The corner of his mouth moved. What happened? I told him, and a few minutes later he was kneeling beside the radiator with a small tool in his hand while I watched from the edge of my desk. The noise stopped almost immediately. Adrian checked it once more, then stood. Should be fine now. Impressive. I turned a valve. Don't ruin the mystery. He gave me that brief smile I had become embarrassingly good at waiting for. Then the practical reason for him to be there ended. We both knew it. Adrian looked toward the door. I expected him to leave. Instead, he sat in the chair beside my desk. The choice was so obvious that neither of us commented on it. For a moment, he studied the boxes I still hadn't completely unpacked. You planning to keep living out of those? They're motivational. For what? Getting out of here. His eyebrows lifted. I realized how that sounded. Eventually, I added, not because of you. That clarification helped. I laughed, then looked down at my hands. I meant I don't want temporary to become permanent just because temporary is comfortable. He was quiet. Maybe because he understood that I wasn't really talking about cardboard boxes. I told him more than I had intended. About how secure I had felt before losing my old job. About accepting the new position because I needed income, then hating myself for treating honest work like evidence that I had failed. Adrian didn't offer one of those empty lines about everything happening for a reason. He simply said, "You're rebuilding. That sounds nicer. It also sounds more accurate." I looked at him. Something about being taken seriously instead of reassured made my chest tighten. "What about you?" I asked. "You always this good at keeping your life under control?" He gave a quiet breath that almost became a laugh. No, it was the first time I had heard him answer a personal question without immediately redirecting it. His gaze moved around the room. "I like knowing what happens in my house. Who's here? What changes? The rules." "Yes." I hesitated. "Including the famous guest rule." His expression changed, but this time he didn't shut down. "That came from a previous tenant." I waited. Adrian rubbed his thumb against the edge of the chair. "It wasn't a good experience. There was clearly more. He wasn't offering it yet, so I didn't ask." "Okay." His eyes returned to mine, and something in his face softened. "Okay, you said there's a reason. I believe you." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The radiator was silent now. The room was warm. Adrian had no repair left to inspect, no household instruction left to give me. Still, he stayed. The awareness of him changed shape. His knee was close to mine, not touching, close enough that I noticed exactly how little movement it would take. Adrian noticed too. His eyes dropped for half a second, then returned to my face. My pulse jumped. This was the point where wanting something became dangerous. He was still my landlord. I was still living in his house because the rent allowed me to rebuild the independence I had lost. Whatever was happening between us, I couldn't afford to confuse vulnerability with permission. So I stayed where I was. Adrian did the same. Eventually, he stood. "Good night, Evan." I glanced at the perfectly quiet radiator. "Good night." He reached the doorway, then looked back at me. Neither of us mentioned that the repair had taken less than 5 minutes. Neither of us mentioned that he had stayed almost an hour. For the next few days, Adrian did something I hadn't expected. He became careful. Not distant exactly. We still ended up in the kitchen together. He still remembered what time I usually came home, and I still caught myself lingering downstairs longer than necessary. But he stopped appearing at my doorway without a reason. After that hour in my room, apparently even Adrian had noticed the pattern, which should have been a relief. Instead, I missed it. Then one evening, he knocked. I looked up from my desk and found him standing in the hallway. "There's something I need to check." I almost laughed. "That sounds familiar." His expression remained serious. "The radiator. It's been quiet since you fixed it. I want to make sure the valve's holding." I moved aside. Adrian entered, crouched beside the radiator, touched the valve, checked it for perhaps 10 seconds, then stood. "Fine," he said. "That was urgent." He looked at me. I looked at the radiator, then back at him. Neither of us moved. Something in me finally got tired of pretending. "Adrian." "Yes. Why do you keep doing this?" His brow tightened. "Doing what?" "Finding reasons to come in here." He glanced toward the door. Continued before I could lose my nerve. "You banned everyone else from this room before I'd even unpacked. But you've checked my window twice, explained my heating, monitored my laundry, and now inspected a radiator that hasn't made a sound in days. I'm responsible for the house. You already checked it." Silence. I stood from my chair. "If I'm reading this wrong, tell me." His eyes met mine. For once, there was no dry answer waiting. "I don't think you are." My heartbeat seemed suddenly too loud for the room. "Then why?" Adrian exhaled slowly. "Because I like talking to you." The simplicity of it hit harder than a dramatic confession would have. He looked almost annoyed with himself. "I like knowing when you're home. I like when you stay downstairs. And sometimes I come upstairs because I want to see you." I swallowed. "So the radiator was fine. The window." A pause. "Mostly fine." I laughed once, quietly, because otherwise I wasn't sure what I would do. "You're terrible at this." "I'm aware." For the first time, the contradiction that had been following us since move-in had an answer. Adrian wasn't making himself the exception because he owned the house. He was doing it because he wanted to be near me. He took one step closer. Not enough to touch. Enough that the space between us stopped feeling accidental. "I shouldn't have used landlord reasons to do it," he said. "No, I know." I could have stepped back. I didn't. His gaze dropped to my mouth, then rose again. Every conversation, every unnecessary knock, every minute he had stayed after some tiny household problem was solved seemed to collect inside that silence. Adrian leaned toward me. I did too. For one suspended second, I was certain he was going to kiss me. Then he stopped. His face was close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw. "Evan." "What?" "You rent a room from me." The reminder felt almost absurd after everything he had just admitted, but I understood immediately. My housing was still tied to him. However much I wanted the distance between us gone, that mattered. I let out a breath and stepped back first. "Right?" Adrian looked relieved and disappointed at exactly the same time. "I don't want you wondering later whether you could say no." That erased the last trace of frustration I felt. "I can say no." "I know. I want there to be nothing attached to it when you say yes either." Neither of us pretended not to understand what yes meant. Adrian moved toward the doorway. This time I didn't want him to leave. But for the first time I also understood why he needed to. He stopped with one hand against the frame. "For what it's worth," he said, "I wasn't lying about everything." I raised an eyebrow. "The washing machine really does stick." I laughed. Adrian smiled, then disappeared into the hallway. I sat back down, staring at the empty doorway. The question wasn't whether Adrian wanted me anymore. He did. The question was what either of us could do about it while I was still living under his roof. After that night, Adrian stopped knocking on my door unless something actually needed his attention. The difference was immediate. I had spent weeks wondering why he kept appearing upstairs. Now that I knew, his absence felt louder than the knocks ever had. We still saw each other downstairs. We still talked in the kitchen after work. But the conversations had acquired boundaries neither of us needed to explain. Adrian no longer followed me upstairs to finish a story. I no longer invented reasons to remain near him when I knew exactly what I wanted. Nothing had reset. That was the problem. One evening, I found him at the kitchen table and sat across from him. "You've become very responsible." He looked up. "I was always responsible. You inspected a perfectly healthy radiator because you wanted to see me." A faint flush appeared along his neck. "I admitted that." "I know. I'm enjoying it." His mouth almost curved. Then the humor faded. "I meant what I said, Evan." "So did I." His eyes held mine. Neither of us needed to define it further. My savings were improving faster now. I had settled into the new job. My expenses had stabilized. And for the first time since losing my old position, moving into my own apartment no longer felt like some distant promise I made to myself. I should have been pleased. Mostly I was, but independence now had a consequence I hadn't expected. Leaving meant leaving Adrian too. A few nights later, we were downstairs again when I finally asked the question I had deliberately left alone. "You said the guest rule came from another tenant." Adrian became still. "You don't have to tell me." "I know." He looked toward the hallway before continuing. "He kept bringing people over. At first I tried to be flexible. Then strangers started being here when he wasn't. I said nothing. I told him to stop. He agreed. Then I came home one night and found people upstairs again. Someone had been through things that weren't theirs. The controlled way Adrian said it made the violation feel more significant, not less. "So after he left, you made the rule?" "Yes. No guests. No ambiguity." That explained the rigidity I had mistaken for something colder when I moved in. "I thought maybe you just hated people." "I don't hate people. You're selective." "Very." His eyes stayed on mine long enough that the word acquired another meaning. Then he exhaled. "And you were right about something else." "What?" The window didn't need checking twice. I smiled despite myself. "I knew it. The laundry reminder could have waited too. And the heating? That one was legitimate." "Thank God." "I was beginning to question your professional integrity." Adrian laughed, but his expression quickly softened. "I kept finding reasons because I wanted to talk to you. Then I realized I was using the fact that I owned the house to make those reasons sound necessary." "You stopped." "I had to." The answer mattered more than I expected. He wasn't ashamed of wanting me. He was making sure wanting me never became something I owed him for. I reached across the table before thinking too hard about it and rested my fingers briefly over his hand. Adrian looked down. He didn't turn his hand beneath mine. He didn't pull me closer. He simply let the small contact exist until I withdrew. The restraint between us no longer felt like uncertainty. It felt deliberate. Later, upstairs, I opened my laptop and checked the number I had been tracking for weeks. My savings had finally reached the point where looking at apartments made practical sense rather than serving as motivation. I should have felt only relief. Instead, I looked toward my bedroom door and thought about all the times Adrian had stood there with an excuse. The mystery of why he kept coming upstairs was gone. I knew why. What I didn't know was whether he would still choose to come toward me once neither the room nor the lease gave him any reason to. 2 days later, I stopped treating apartment listings like something I was only allowed to look at. By the end of the week, I had one. I stood in the kitchen that evening with the confirmation on my phone and Adrian across the counter from me. For weeks, saving enough to leave had been proof that my life was moving forward again. Now I had to tell the man I wanted that I was leaving his house. I found a place. Adrian's expression changed before he controlled it. An apartment? Yeah, I can afford it now. He looked down for a second, then nodded. That's good, Evan. It was exactly the response I should have wanted. You think so? You've been working toward this since you moved in. I know. When do you get it? Soon enough that I should start packing. Another pause. Then Adrian smiled, small and careful. Congratulations. There was no request to reconsider. No reminder that my rent here was cheaper. No suggestion that staying another month would make financial sense. Nothing that could turn my feelings for him into leverage. I understood why. Understanding did not make it hurt less. That weekend, I started putting my life back into the same boxes I had never completely unpacked. Adrian helped. The first time he carried one downstairs, I nearly told him I could manage it myself. Then I remembered him carrying one upstairs on move-in day, before either of us knew what the room would become. You don't have to do this, I said. I know. There was that word again. Choice. He took another box anyway. By evening, half my shelves were empty. I stood in the doorway looking at the room while Adrian folded the bottom of another cardboard box into place. This looks weird. It looked like this when you arrived. That was different. Adrian didn't answer. The silence between us had changed again. The attraction was still there. So was the knowledge of why neither of us had acted on it. But now the boundary protecting me was about to disappear, and Adrian still hadn't said what would happen afterward. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe wanting someone inside a particular circumstance didn't mean wanting them once the circumstance ended. I hated how quickly that thought found every insecurity I had tried to leave behind with my old job. Adrian handed me the empty box. You okay? Fine. His expression made it clear he didn't believe me. I looked around the room rather than at him. You're making this very easy. His brow furrowed. Moving. Leaving. Something tightened in his face. What do you want me to do? Ask me to stay, I thought. But the moment I imagined him saying it, I understood why he wouldn't. If Adrian asked me to remain in the room while I still rented from him, I would never know whether he was choosing me or preserving the arrangement that kept me close. And he would never know whether I stayed because I wanted him or because leaving suddenly felt like rejecting him. So I shook my head. Nothing. Adrian studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. He picked up another box and carried it downstairs. I watched him go. For weeks, the house itself had done the difficult work for us. One kitchen, one staircase, one hallway, a room Adrian could always invent some reason to visit. Soon I would have my own front door. He would have no reason to knock on it. That night, surrounded by boxes again, I finally understood what scared me about getting exactly what I had worked for. When I moved into Adrian's house, leaving had been the goal. Now leaving meant discovering whether there was anything between us strong enough to survive once neither of us had to stay. Moving day arrived with less drama than I had secretly hoped for. No sudden disaster. No broken lease. No convenient reason for me to stay another week. Just boxes. Adrian helped me carry the last of them downstairs with the same quiet efficiency he had shown on the day I moved in. The difference was that now every trip through the hallway felt like a countdown. When we returned upstairs for the final box, I stopped inside the nearly empty room. The bed was stripped. The shelves were bare. The desk had already gone. Adrian stood near the doorway. For once, he had a legitimate reason to be in my room, and neither of us seemed to know what to do with it. That's everything, I said. Looks like it. I picked up the box. Adrian reached for it. I've got it. I can carry one box. I know. I almost laughed. He took it anyway. Downstairs, he set it with the others and stepped back. This was it. Soon I would walk through the front door, and the arrangement that had put us under the same roof would be over. I looked at him. So, Adrian repeated. You successfully got rid of your tenant. His expression tightened. That wasn't what I wanted. The words stopped me. Adrian glanced toward the stairs, then back at me. I need to say something before you go. My pulse accelerated. Okay. When you first moved in, I told myself I was checking on the room. Then I told myself I was being responsible. The window, the heating, the washing machine, the completely healthy radiator. I smiled. So your record isn't great. No, his smile vanished almost immediately. But when I realized why I was doing it, I also realized there was something I couldn't do. Ask me to stay. Adrian held my gaze. Yes. The answer hurt and relieved me at once. I wanted to, he said. More than once. Then why didn't you? You know why. I did. Still, I needed to hear it. Adrian stepped closer, leaving enough distance between us that the choice remained mine. Because I never wanted you wondering whether keeping this room depended on how you felt about me. And I didn't want you staying because saying no to your landlord felt harder than saying no to some man asking you out. The house was silent around us. So I'm leaving, I said. Yes. And you're helping me. Yes. That's a terrible strategy if you want me around. A quiet laugh escaped him. I know. Then Adrian's expression changed. No landlord carefulness. No practical excuse. Just fear. I'm hoping I don't need the room to keep you around. There it was. The answer to the question that had followed me through every box I packed. I set my keys on the counter between us. Adrian looked down at them, then back at me. My tenancy is over, I said. He nodded. So ask me now. For a moment he didn't move. Then he drew a breath. Evan, will you come back tomorrow? I smiled. You need something repaired? No window inspection? No laundry emergency? His eyes warmed. I want to take you to dinner. The simplicity of it nearly undid me. As your tenant? As the man I've been trying not to kiss for weeks. I stepped toward him. Good answer. This time, when Adrian looked at my mouth, he didn't stop himself because of a lease. But he still waited. I closed the remaining distance. Our first kiss was careful for about half a second. Then Adrian's hand came lightly to my waist, and weeks of interrupted moments, unnecessary visits, and deliberate restraint finally had somewhere to go. When we separated, he rested his forehead briefly against mine. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow. For an actual date. I understood that part. And after that? I looked at him. The uncertainty in his face mattered. Adrian wasn't asking me to remain inside a situation he controlled. He was asking whether I would choose him after I had already chosen my independence. We find out, I said. Without fake maintenance emergencies. That seems unnecessarily restrictive. I laughed and kissed him again. Then I picked up the last box. Adrian opened the front door for me. I walked through it. For the first time since we met, there was no lease, no room, and no shared address requiring either of us to come back. Tomorrow I would anyway. The next evening, I stood outside Adrian's front door with no key in my pocket. That felt stranger than I expected. For weeks, I had come and gone without thinking about it. Now my boxes were unpacked in my own apartment. My clothes were hanging in my own closet. And the first rent payment I would make there had nothing to do with Adrian Mercer. I had wanted that independence since the day I moved into his house. Having it felt good. Coming back felt even better. I knocked. A few seconds later, Adrian opened the door. He had clearly been waiting. The guarded landlord who had once handed me a printed list of rules was nowhere to be seen. You came back, he said. You invited me. I know. You seem surprised. I'm adjusting. I smiled. To what? Having no practical reason for you to be here. There was something wonderfully different about hearing him admit it. No broken window. No heating problem. No suspiciously healthy radiator. Just me. I glanced past him into the hallway that had once led upstairs to my rented room. So what happens if I come inside? Adrian narrowed his eyes slightly. What do you mean? I remember this house having rules. Understanding appeared on his face. Right? Very strict rules. Some of them. No guests upstairs, I reminded him. No exceptions. Adrian leaned against the doorway. You're enjoying this? Immensely. He looked at me for a moment, and the smile that followed was no longer rare enough for me to count. The rule still stands. I stared at him. Seriously. Mostly. Adrian. He reached for my hand. His fingers closed around mine with none of the restraint that had defined those last weeks of my tenancy. You're the exception. The words should have been ridiculous. Instead, they landed somewhere deep. When I had first arrived, being the exception had meant Adrian finding excuses to enter my room while both of us pretended his presence was accidental. Now there was nothing accidental about it. I had my own apartment. He had his house. Either of us could close a door. Neither of us wanted to. So, Adrian said, still holding my hand, "Are you coming in?" I thought guests were forbidden. One guest. That sounds dangerously flexible. I've learned to live with it. I stepped across the threshold. Adrian closed the door behind me, then kissed me before I could make another joke. This kiss felt different from the ones on moving day. There was no ending waiting immediately behind it, no last box beside the door, no question about whether I was staying because I had somewhere else to go. I did have somewhere else to go. That was precisely why being there mattered. When Adrian pulled back, I glanced toward the staircase. My old room better not have another tenant already. Jealous. Concerned about your screening standards. They've become extremely selective. I laughed. He squeezed my hand and led me farther into the house, not toward the room I used to rent, but toward the evening we had actually chosen. I had moved into Adrian's house because I needed somewhere temporary while I rebuilt my life. I left because temporary had finally done its job. And then I came back for the one thing neither the lease nor the house had ever been able to require. Him. Adrian had banned every guest from my room. In the end, the man who kept making himself the exception had simply been waiting until I was free to choose him too.